The rain hammered against the windows like 1,000 desperate fingers trying to get in, and Marcus Rivera stood frozen in his dimly lit living room, staring at the door that had just been pounded on at midnight. His heart raced as he glanced toward the hallway where his 6-year-old daughter Sophia slept, oblivious to the storm raging outside and the one about to unfold inside. When he opened the door, water cascading off the awning, he found the last person he expected to see. Victoria Hartwell, his boss, the ice-cold CEO of Hartwell Technologies, standing drenched to the bone in what must have been $1,000 suit, now ruined. Her mascara ran in dark rivers down her cheeks, and her usually perfect composure had shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. She looked at him with eyes that held something he had never seen before, raw, unfiltered vulnerability, and when she opened her mouth to speak, her voice cracked with a desperation that made his chest tighten. "I heard what you said at the office today," she whispered, her words barely audible over the thunder. "About me. About why you think I am the way I am. Say that again, Marcus. Say it again while you look at me." The day had started like any other nightmare for Marcus. Waking up at 5:30 in the morning to pack Sophia's lunch, making sure her favorite purple backpack had everything she needed for school, kissing her forehead as she ate her cereal half asleep, and then rushing to drop her off before speeding across town to make it to Hartwell Technologies by 8. Being a single father was a battle he fought every single day, a war waged on multiple fronts with no reinforcements coming. His ex-wife, Gabriella, had left 3 years ago, deciding that motherhood and marriage were suffocating her dreams, leaving him with a 3-year-old and a pile of unpaid bills. He had learned to cook, to braid hair, to check for monsters under the bed, to be both mother and father, all while trying to keep his job as a senior software engineer at one of the most demanding tech companies in the city. Victoria Hartwell was legendary in the industry. She had built her company from the ground up, turning a small startup into a billion-dollar empire before she turned 40. She was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly terrifying to everyone who worked for her. She had a reputation for firing people on the spot for the smallest mistakes, for working 18-hour days and expecting everyone else to do the same, for having ice water running through her veins instead of blood. Marcus had worked there for 2 years, and in all that time, he had maybe exchanged a dozen words with her directly. She existed in a different stratosphere, untouchable and unreachable, more force of nature than human being. But today had been different. Today, Marcus had made a mistake that could cost him everything. He had stayed late the night before trying to fix a critical bug in the system, getting home at 11 to find Sophia still awake because the babysitter had fallen asleep on the couch. He had spent an hour calming her down, singing her to sleep, and then collapsed into bed himself, forgetting to set his alarm. He woke up at 7:45, his phone dead, panic flooding his system. He had thrown Sophia into the car, still in her pajamas, driven like a madman to his neighbor's house, begged her to take Sophia to school, and then raced to work, arriving at 9:15. Victoria had been in the hallway when he burst through the doors, sweating and disheveled, and her eyes had locked onto him like a predator spotting wounded prey. If you believe in second chances, in the power of kindness, in the idea that everyone carries invisible battles we know nothing about, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. We love hearing from you, and your support means everything. Now let's continue with Marcus's story. The meeting had been brutal. Victoria had called him into her office, her voice cold and clipped, and proceeded to tear apart his performance over the past month. She had statistics, timestamps, metrics that showed every moment he had left early or arrived late, every deadline he had pushed, every excuse he had made. She sat behind her massive glass desk like a judge pronouncing sentence, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the surface, each tap like a nail in his coffin. Marcus had tried to explain, tried to make her understand that he was doing his best, that being a single parent meant sometimes things didn't go according to plan, but her expression never changed. She had looked at him as if he were speaking a foreign language, as if the very concept of having personal responsibilities outside of work was incomprehensible to her. "I don't pay you to have excuses, Rivera," she had said, her voice like winter frost. "I pay you to do your job. If you cannot manage your personal life without it affecting your professional performance, then perhaps you need to reconsider whether you belong here." He had left her office feeling hollowed out, defeated, the weight of potential unemployment pressing down on his shoulders like a physical burden. He needed this job desperately. The salary was good enough to cover Sophia's expenses, the health insurance was keeping them afloat, and in this economy, finding another position that would accommodate his situation felt nearly impossible. He had gone back to his desk, buried his face in his hands for just a moment, and that was when his coworker, Jason, had approached him. Jason was one of the few people at the company who knew about Marcus's situation, who had covered for him a few times when emergencies arose. "Rough meeting?" Jason had asked, sympathy clear in his voice. Marcus had nodded, exhausted beyond words. And then, in a moment of weakness, of frustration and anger and bone-deep tiredness, he had said something he immediately wished he could take back. "She has no idea what it's like to be human," he had muttered, not even looking up. "To have someone depending on you, to have responsibilities beyond spreadsheets and profit margins. I wonder if Victoria Hartwell has ever actually cared about another person in her entire life, or if she was just born with a calculator where her heart should be. Maybe if she knew what it was like to actually love something more than her company, to have her world not revolve around herself, she would understand that sometimes life happens and you just have to deal with it. But she's probably been alone her whole life, and that's exactly what she deserves." The words had felt good in the moment, a release of all the pressure and stress that had been building for months. Jason had given him an uncomfortable look, half agreement and half warning, and they had gone back to work. Marcus had forgotten about it within an hour, buried under code and deadlines and the constant anxiety that hummed beneath everything he did. He had left at 6, picked up Sophia from after-school care, made dinner, helped with homework, given her a bath, read her 3 stories, and finally gotten her to bed by 9. He had collapsed onto the couch afterward, too tired to even turn on the television, just sitting in the quiet darkness of his small apartment, wondering how much longer he could keep this up. And then, at midnight, came the knock. That desperate, urgent pounding that made his heart leap into his throat, that brought him to the door expecting police or emergency or some new disaster to navigate. Instead, he found Victoria Hartwell, transformed from the untouchable ice queen he knew into something else entirely, something broken and real and completely unexpected. The rain had plastered her dark hair to her skull, her expensive suit hung heavy and waterlogged on her frame, and when she looked at him, he saw something in her eyes that made all his previous anger dissolve into confusion and concern. She looked like someone who had been wandering through the storm for hours, like someone who had finally reached the end of some long and terrible journey. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice hoarse, and Marcus stepped aside automatically, too shocked to do anything else. She walked into his small living room, dripping onto the worn carpet, looking utterly out of place in her designer clothes among his secondhand furniture and Sophia's toys scattered across the floor. She stood there for a long moment, wrapping her arms around herself, shivering despite the warmth of the apartment. Marcus grabbed a towel from the bathroom and handed it to her, watching as she pressed it to her face, her shoulders shaking. He thought she might be crying, but when she lowered the towel, her eyes were dry, just infinitely tired. "There's a coffee shop across from our building," she began, her voice steady despite everything. "Small place, terrible coffee, but they have a window that looks directly into the main office floor. I go there sometimes when I need to think, to watch the company running without me in it, to see if it would all fall apart if I disappeared." She looked at him directly, and he saw something raw in her expression. "I was there today after our meeting. I couldn't stop thinking about what I said to you, about whether I had been too harsh, whether I had been unfair, and then I saw you talking to Jason. I saw your face. I couldn't hear what you said, but I could read your lips well enough." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "You said I've never cared about another person in my life, that I deserved to be alone." Marcus felt his stomach drop, heat flooding his face with shame and embarrassment. "Ms. Hartwell, I'm so sorry. I was angry and frustrated. I didn't mean—" "Stop," she cut him off, raising one hand. "I'm not here for an apology. I'm here because you were right." She moved to his couch, sitting down heavily, and Marcus noticed for the first time how utterly exhausted she looked, as if she hadn't slept in days. "I went home after I saw you say that. I sat in my apartment, this massive penthouse that cost more money than you'll probably make in your lifetime, and I looked around at all the emptiness. No pictures on the walls, no personal items, nothing that would indicate a human being actually lives there. And I realized you were right. I have been alone my whole life. And maybe I do deserve it." Marcus sat down across from her, completely at a loss for words. This wasn't the Victoria Hartwell he knew. This wasn't the woman who had terrified him for 2 years, who had made grown men cry in meetings, who seemed more machine than person. This was someone else entirely, someone vulnerable and hurting, and he had no idea what to do with that. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked quietly. Victoria looked at him, and in her eyes was a depth of pain he had never imagined existed in her. "Because I need someone to know. I need someone to understand that I wasn't always like this, that I didn't want to become this." She took a deep breath, and then she started talking, words spilling out like water from a broken dam. She told him about growing up as the daughter of an alcoholic father and a mother who worked 3 jobs to keep them fed. About watching her mother collapse from exhaustion when Victoria was 12, being rushed to the hospital, the doctors saying she had worked herself literally to death. About being placed in foster care, bouncing from home to home, learning that the only person you could rely on was yourself. About studying every free moment, getting scholarships, working her way through college while living in her car. About building her company from nothing, pouring every ounce of herself into it because it was the only thing that had never abandoned her, the only thing she could control. "I made a choice," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I chose to be hard, to be cold, to never let anyone close enough to hurt me, to never depend on anyone, to never give anyone power over me. And it worked. I built an empire. I became successful beyond my wildest dreams, but somewhere along the way, I forgot how to be anything else. I forgot how to be human." She looked around his apartment, taking in the drawings Sophia had made that covered his refrigerator, the small shoes by the door, the pink blanket draped over the chair. "You have something I never allowed myself to have. Someone who depends on you, who loves you, who matters more than any job or company or bank account. And I punished you for it today because I was jealous. Because seeing you fight so hard to balance both your work and your daughter reminded me of everything I gave up, everything I told myself I didn't need." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a wall crumbling that he hadn't even known was there. He thought about his own struggles, about the countless nights he had lain awake, wondering if he was failing Sophia, if he was being a terrible father, if he should just give up and move back home to his parents, who had offered to help, but whom he was too proud to accept help from. He thought about the loneliness of being a single parent, of having no one to share the burden with, no one to celebrate the small victories with, no one to tell him he was doing okay. And he realized that he and Victoria Hartwell weren't as different as he had thought. They were both alone, both fighting battles no one else could see, both trying desperately to keep their heads above water while the world demanded more and more from them. "You asked me to say it again while looking at you," Marcus said slowly, carefully. "But I can't, because I was wrong. You're not someone who's never cared about anyone. You're someone who's been hurt so badly that caring became too dangerous, and that's not the same thing at all." Victoria's composure finally cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, mixing with the rain that still clung to her face, and she pressed her hands to her eyes like she could somehow push the emotion back inside. Marcus moved to sit beside her, and after a moment's hesitation, he put his hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Instead, she turned toward him, and suddenly she was crying against his chest, her whole body shaking with sobs that sounded like they had been building for decades. He held her, this terrifying woman who held his livelihood in her hands, and felt his own eyes burning with tears. For all the differences between them, in this moment, they were just two people who were tired of being alone, tired of being strong, tired of pretending they had everything under control. They talked for hours that night. Victoria told him about the dreams she used to have as a child, about wanting to be a teacher, about loving art and poetry before survival became more important than passion. Marcus told her about Sophia, about the joy and terror of being responsible for another human being, about the guilt he carried for not being enough, for not giving her the life he thought she deserved. Victoria asked to see pictures, and Marcus showed her his phone, scrolling through hundreds of images of his daughter. Sophia on her first day of school, Sophia missing her front teeth, Sophia covered in paint, Sophia asleep on his lap. Victoria touched the screen gently, like the images might break, and whispered, "She looks happy. You're doing a good job." Those simple words, coming from someone who never gave praise, meant more to Marcus than any performance review or salary increase ever could. "Thank you," he said, and meant it with everything in him. As the night stretched toward dawn, Victoria stood to leave. The rain had stopped, and the first hints of light were creeping across the horizon. She looked different now, softer somehow, as if letting down her walls had physically changed her. "I'm going to do better," she said firmly. "Not just with you, but with everyone. I'm going to remember that my employees are people with lives and families and struggles that have nothing to do with profit margins and quarterly reports. I can't promise I'll be perfect at it. I've been doing things my way for a long time, but I'm going to try." Marcus nodded, believing her. "And I'm going to work harder to balance everything better. To not let my struggles become excuses. We both have to do better." Victoria smiled, a real smile that transformed her face into something almost unrecognizable. Partnership then, boss and employee, but also maybe friends who understand what the other is fighting for. She extended her hand, and Marcus took it, sealing an agreement that felt more important than any contract he had ever signed. If this story touched your heart, if you felt something real in Marcus and Victoria's journey, we need you to do something for us. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment below. Tell us about a time when someone surprised you by showing their vulnerable side. Tell us about someone who saw beyond your walls. Your stories matter, and they inspire us to keep sharing these messages. The next Monday at work, Marcus arrived to find his schedule had been adjusted to accommodate school drop-offs and pickups. Victoria had implemented a new flexible working policy for parents, allowing remote work when needed and understanding that emergencies happened. She also announced a company-wide initiative about mental health and work-life balance, partnering with organizations that supported families in need. In the months that followed, Victoria became a regular, if somewhat awkward, presence in Marcus's life. She came to Sophia's school play, sitting in the audience with an enormous bouquet of flowers, crying openly when Sophia took her bow. She learned to leave work at reasonable hours, to ask her employees about their weekends, to remember that the people who worked for her were humans with full lives beyond the office walls. She started dating again, cautiously, and called Marcus for advice, laughing at how ridiculous she felt being nervous about a dinner date at her age. Marcus watched his boss transform into someone he genuinely admired, someone who proved that it was never too late to change, to choose vulnerability over armor, to let people in despite the risk of being hurt. And Victoria watched Marcus continue to be the kind of father she wished she'd had, the kind of person who fought every day to show up for the people he loved, who proved that strength wasn't about never falling, but about getting back up every single time. Before we end this story, we want to ask you something special. In the comments below, just type the word kindness if you believe that compassion and understanding can change lives. Let's fill this comment section with that one word, creating a wave of positivity that reminds us all what truly matters. The final scene of this story takes place 6 months after that rainy midnight when everything changed. Marcus and Sophia are at the park, and Sophia is on the swings, laughing as Marcus pushes her higher and higher. A figure approaches from the parking lot, and Sophia shouts with delight. "Aunt Victoria!" she calls, waving frantically. Victoria waves back, carrying a bag from Sophia's favorite bakery, and Marcus smiles, shaking his head in amazement at how his life has transformed. The three of them sit at a picnic table, eating cupcakes and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. And in this moment, they are not boss and employee, not CEO and single father. They are simply three people who found each other in the darkness and chose to walk toward the light together. Victoria looks at Marcus, and in her eyes is gratitude mixed with something like peace, something she never thought she would feel. "Thank you," she says quietly, "for seeing me when I didn't want to be seen." Marcus reaches over and squeezes her hand. "Thank you for knocking on my door at midnight, for being brave enough to show up." And Sophia, oblivious to the weight of the moment, simply asks if they can go get ice cream next, and both adults laugh, saying yes, because sometimes the answer to healing is just that simple. Showing up, being present, and saying yes to the small joys that make life worth living. In a world that often feels cold and unforgiving, they had created something warm and real, and that made all the difference.